All right. Can everyone hear me? Everything's good? Everything's working? Excellent. Thanks so much for coming to this session. I'm excited to see that people are excited about Drupal CMS. This is great news. My name's Suzanne Degacheva, and I've been working in the last 9 months. I've stepped aside now, but I was part of the Drupal CMS leadership team as the marketing lead. So I've also been involved in a bit of the UX work that's been done, and I'm finding it really exciting, really motivating, and I hope you get a sense of that today. I'm going to be sharing a bit of the work that we've been doing. You just heard about Evolving Web. We do lots of cool Drupal projects. But I'll jump right into...
I was going to say stay. Yes? When you're close to this, it's louder, and when you're not close to it, it's quieter. So
I will try not
there's
to
a level there somewhere too, but yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to I'm going to do a tiny intro to Drupal CMS just to talk to you about how I've been thinking about this product, and then I'll jump into the user research that I've been working on with my colleague Bruna, and also how that's contributing to the UX as a whole. So to start with, how many of you have tried Drupal CMS already? So I encourage you as homework tonight, if you have not tried this. Yesterday, awesome. Oh, great, yeah, there was the training yesterday, perfect. So you can go to drupal.org/Drupal CMS, and you can get the link to the trial there. It's easy to just click through and spin up a site. You don't have to install anything. But just so that you know what this product is all about, it's a CMS that really takes Drupal and reorients it for the marketer and content editor audience. It is fully Drupal core, so I find this really important to communicate to people who haven't tried it yet, that when you're building a standard Drupal site like you've always done, you start with the Drupal core, and you do all this work to add modules and do configuration, and you end up with your finished site. So let's say you've all done that, you have your finished site. With Drupal CMS, you can start also with Drupal core, and you also end up with this finished site, and it could be the exact same site. So what Drupal CMS gives you is a setup process. It gives you a bunch of standard modules already installed, some content types you can pick from, some smart defaults and best practices that help you get to that finished site faster. And the idea is that if you are not a developer, you probably want all of that help, and you want someone else to pick those 64 some odd modules rather than you having to go download them yourself. So it really jumpstarts you and takes advantage of a lot of best practices that people have already established in the Drupal community. It also has this nice setup process. So when you first walk through it, I think that's one of the key selling points in terms of usability. So I didn't plan to do a whole demo of Drupal CMS, because what we're talking about today is more looking actually outside the Drupal sphere and looking at some best practices that we can bring in making additional improvements to Drupal CMS and Drupal itself. So this project to do some user research really came from the fact that historically, Drupal development has always been done kind of like a scratch my own itch style. Like a lot of people working on different projects, and they're working on things that they want to see improved in their CMS. And the approach of Drupal CMS is more to take on this mission of making the user experience better for content editors and marketers, and that takes a more kind of top-down approach of what do we want that experience to be, and how do we build that into the product as a whole. So doing user interviews, doing some benchmarking, this is to contribute to that effort. And the really interesting thing is that we went out and talked to people who are marketers, and many of them have used Drupal, but they've all used other platforms as well. So we're not just talking to people about oh, you've been using Drupal for 10 years, what do you think of it? But we're actually talking to people who are more poly CMS folks who have different experiences, and they're coming at it more from a marketing and content perspective. And often, the feedback we have is familiar. But what really struck us is that a lot of people come to this with the fact that they have a first impression of Drupal that was built maybe from a previous version or maybe because of how it was configured for them. And so there's a lot of work to do to overcome these kind of conceptions. And we also saw in talking to a lot of users that we might have just assumed that people thought WordPress was easier to use, but we actually bumped into a lot of opportunities for Drupal where other platforms like WordPress or Webflow or Adobe or other things they had been using, where they actually hit walls and things that were not flexible enough. So we saw there's a lot of opportunity actually because Drupal's already seen as something quite flexible and powerful. And so when we walked away from the interviews, we were really looking to use the interviews to decide what to work on next. Like what kind of features do we want to do usability testing of? What kind of features should we focus on for Drupal CMS? Where should we be putting more of our time? And so we kind of came up with this list of ways that marketers assess a CMS. So if there's a marketer in the room when you're pitching which CMS to use, or if they're actually the one going out and doing the research themselves, what are they looking for? And I think a lot of these things are things we would expect to see, like ease of use is top of the list. But some of the things I thought were really interesting is that marketers are specifically looking for something that allows them to tie their site into marketing integrations. And they're looking for that exact thing, like marketing integrations, a whole ecosystem of them. And they hear about modules and plugins and things like that, but they kind of are used to, with a marketing stack, having a specific list of things that they can integrate with as a marketer that's going to help them tie into their dozen or so other tools that they like to use, like Google Analytics, like their CRM, and whatnot. Another thing I thought was really interesting is that the familiarity and support was so important. So picking a CMS is not always this logical choice of, I'm going to look at every CMS, I'm going to look at the features I need, and I'm going to see which one checks all the checkboxes. But often it was more a matter of, well, what does my team already know? Or what seems like it's going to be easy to onboard people on? Like, where's their documentation? Is there a community of practice? And so these also were really important especially for marketers. So we got all this feedback and insights. And I think, we can kind of look at this from the perspective of what are the pain points, or we could look at it from the perspective of the opportunities. So in terms of pain points that people just generally have with their CMS, whatever they end up using, they're going to have pain points. Everybody has an issue with their CMS, doesn't matter what they're using. Often it was the learning curve. And that's not just a Drupal comment, it's actually something a lot of people found in other CMSs as well. People find that at some point their flexibility is limited, and people find that they end up with a dead end. So for certain platforms, you don't have the option of adding certain features like personalization, and you've already invested a lot of time in your CMS. So I'm going to move on to talk about the benchmarking work. And this is where kind of the meat of my presentation is, because we've actually collected a lot of interesting kind of touch points of what other CMS is doing. So we kind of went out on a scavenger hunt. We saw there's all these opportunities for Drupal to do better. There's all these pain points that people have. We don't want to just go and assume that we should be designing something that looks exactly like WordPress.com or exactly like Webflow. We want to step back a bit and look at the whole landscape and just gather examples, because we need to make it easier for the developers working on all the aspects of Drupal CMS to see, here's how it could look, and here are some ideas to get out there. So before we go into usability testing and more kind of specific UX wireframing, let's just see what the lay of the land is. Now we have all the CMSs in the world we could go out and assess, and I think we had a long list of, 20 CMSs we could have started benchmarking. I think in the Dries, the product strategy for Drupal CMS that Dries put out, there is a specific list of CMSs that are considered, competitors for Drupal CMS. And we ended up deciding to go with this short list. Not because we think that these are the biggest competitors of Drupal, but just because we thought these were the best places to look when we're trying to orient the experience much more around content editors and marketers. So CMS competitors, I would say in quotes, because these are not don't take a screenshot of this and say, oh, Suzanne said these were the Drupal competitors. It's not like that. It's more about finding examples that are outside of the Drupal bubble. We also were really focused on these target users. So again, like Drupal, of course, it's used by developers, but Drupal CMS is supposed to really make it easier for these new users of Drupal to get in the door. So when we're looking at the product of Drupal CMS, the target audiences or the archetypes that we're focusing on are the marketer, the site builder, and the content editor. And I'm sorry, I just have the link here. I should have the node ID on, but if you just Google for archetypes for Drupal CMS on Drupal.org, there's a page. And we have these tasks that have been identified for each one. And so the idea is, how do we focus on the features that are most important to these users? The other angle that we wanted to come from is what examples are we looking for? We're going on this scavenger hunt of what does a good CMS feel like? What does ease of use feel like? How do we make it easier for people to feel like they're building compliant content? All these things. And so we came up with a short list of 23 things that we thought people would want to do with a CMS. And we were really looking at this as areas where we want to know all the landscape options available. And we are not doing this as a usability test where we're defining a whole task, because we want these tasks to apply to basically any CMS. So we want to say, okay, if you opened up, what CMSs do people use here? Do people use Webflow? Yeah? Anyone use something else?
I've used a bunch of them as a marketer. I've used Umbraco, Joomla.
Right, so if you're going to use Umbraco,
SAP products.
Yeah, if you were going to use Umbraco and then you just wanted to create reusable page templates, how would you do that? So these tasks are designed to be general enough that you could pretty much open up any CMS and try to do the thing in it. And then we're actually, as part of the benchmarking, we're asking people to document a little bit what are the steps that you took to do the thing, how, to see how complicated it was, how was the experience, and then what did it look like. And as part of the benchmarking, we tried to make it easy enough for people to come in and help. So all of you can come and help with this benchmarking. Actually, I'm going to give you the link. But basically, we do want people to capture what they see, like seeing the visuals of the other CMS backends is really valuable. So we asked people to take screenshots, to list the steps as well as they could, and then possibly to take a video if they want to. So we have this form, so you can go, the URL, it's bit.ly link /Drupal CMS -benchmarking. You can go and see basically enter in the CMS you want to test out and pick the task that you want to document. And we asked people to go off and do this so we could start seeing the best examples. And this is not, again, to reiterate, we're not trying to go and emulate a whole other CMS. We're really looking to hone in on what are positive examples, what should we be avoiding because it's obviously too complicated or not appropriate for our target audience, and then jargon alert. So it's really much more obvious when you look at a different CMS when there's so much jargon there that it's almost impossible for a newcomer to understand. So how many of you have a Drupal site that you kind of log into on a regular basis? Yeah, so you're probably used to, like, you look at something, you look at like a views configuration page, or you look at even the page for setting up a content type, and you know how to work your way around. But a newcomer is going to see all the jargon. They're going to see where it says configure instead of edit, and it kind of throws them off. And so when you look at a CMS that you haven't spent a lot of time with, that jargon becomes much more apparent, even if the interface is comparably complex to Drupal. So I'm going to highlight a few aspects. And one thing I meant to add a slide to kind of organize my thoughts on this, but the kind of three main categories, if we look back at all these tasks for people, when I thought about these three main categories, I was thinking there's a category of CMS tasks around kind of onboarding, there's a whole series of tasks around interacting with your content, and then there's a whole series of tasks more around like getting the site done and getting it out the door. Like, I want it to be SEO compliant, I want to make sure the privacy settings are right, I want to check the docs, things like that. So to start off with some of the more initial tasks that people do. So one page that I think there's been a lot of discussion of for Drupal CMS is how people go about finding recipes and adding functionality to their site, adding modules. So how many people here are familiar with recipes already? Some of you?
Again, I was in the training yesterday.
Yeah, in the training, yeah. Awesome. Check out the next training. I think there's probably one in DrupalCon Atlanta and Drupal CMS. So recipes are kind of a new thing in the Drupal ecosystem where you can go and add some pre-built configuration to your site. And so it adds one more thing that you have to go out and find, right? You have already modules and themes that you have to decide on. Now you also have to decide on recipes. The good thing about recipes is that there's some recommended ones for you. So I didn't do the demo of Drupal CMS today. Maybe I should have, I'm sorry, but basically it's a set of things like you want to have SEO tools, just go and turn that on. You want to have your events, go and turn that on. So these are recipes that just kind of give you that prepackaged configuration and functionality. Those in addition to the modules that you already have. So we're really looking for patterns of how do we make it easier for people to make that decision about adding an extra chunk of functionality or an extra piece of configuration to their site. So we looked at WordPress, or the person who did the benchmarking looked at WordPress.org for us, and I think we can tell right away, because I used to do WordPress, I don't anymore. Like, to me this seems a bit complicated, right? I have a bunch of choices. I'm not familiar with all the terminology. And so I can see that probably these descriptions here that are being pulled in were written for a developer. So we can see that one of the challenges that Drupal faces in making itself more easy to use for content editors and marketers is that if you pull in a list of modules or a list of recipes, that those descriptions might be written for developers. So maybe the interface, I'm not even looking at the interface, like the interface, install now, seems easy enough. I like the ratings, maybe that makes it easy for me to decide. But if the little descriptions are too hard for me to understand, I'm not really going to know which one to pick. Onboarding is really interesting. So another thing we've seen in different CMSs is this kind of idea of a walkthrough. So if you go and add, start setting up Drupal CMS right now, the first step is kind of this prompt of like, what kind of site are you trying to build? And a lot of CMSs do this. Contentful in particular really tries to profile you from the first step of like, are you a developer? Are you a content editor? Are you a marketer? And then it's going to give you different kind of options depending on what you've picked. And what is kind of interesting here is that it's still, it doesn't just walk you through the steps one by one. It shows you a dashboard of here are all the steps and here's where you are in the process. And it seems like a very useful pattern in UX, not to just show people their decision at this point, but really to show them the whole decision-making process and allow them to jump in and change, go back and change decisions that they've made. One feedback though was that once you had picked developer, Emma must have done this because it says welcome Emma. So when Emma had picked that she's a developer, she didn't have a way to go back and kind of change her profile later. So that was one negative thing we saw. One thing we saw for WordPress.com is that the idea of onboarding, like just setting up your site, immediately took you into the page building experience and this kind of immersive overlay that you get on the site where you can interact with things. So this, and I had to write down the name of it, the site editor experience of kind of having this black toolbar on the left where you can go in and change your navigation, or these options on the right where you can go in and change style settings right away, even as part of like just the initial setup of your site. You were introduced to this piece of the interface. I'm going to skip over the video because I feel like I've already had enough technical challenges. Oh no. There, okay, good. Skip the video. On Squarespace, it was a similar, on Squarespace, one of the features that was pointed out is that they offer, I don't think they offer, I think they just always give you demo content. And I don't know about how all of you feel about demo content, but the person who did the benchmarking felt like the demo content felt really real, almost to the extent where it felt like you couldn't go back and change it. Like it was no longer a site that felt like it was going to be your site, because it kind of pigeonholes you into this whole demo environment where the site seems like it's almost finished. So it's an interesting feedback that demo content seems like always a positive thing, but could actually make content editors feel a little bit like they don't know where to start, because it doesn't seem like a site that they're about to build. It seems like a site that's already finished and they're just having to customize everything. So some key observations about the whole onboarding experience. So first impressions count. Onboarding needs to be kind of opinionated because it has to make it easier to set up your site. That can make it hard to make decisions about what should be in the onboarding. A lot of experiences are kind of immersive from the start, so they jump you right into this whole site editor experience. So that's one kind of decision to make, is should we just throw people right into the editing experience as soon as they hit the page, or do we layer in some kind of dashboard that gives people the sense of like they know what's going on? And then jargon creep. So just from the get-go, as you're setting up additional features that you want to add to your site right away, it's hard to avoid seeing that jargon in the interface. So dashboards are pretty interesting, and we actually had I think one of the tasks is dashboards. We got a lot of interesting examples of those, and a lot of different examples depending on the type of tool that we were looking at. So this example from Webflow I thought was really interesting, because Webflow doesn't assume that you just have one site. So their dashboard, when they talk about dashboards, they're actually talking about stepping back and seeing what do all of your sites, what are all the sites that you have that you could be editing. And then it also gives you a link into a marketplace. So keep in mind, a lot of these products we decided to do benchmarking for our paid products. So it's all about the marketplace. Like, yes, you're paying your, how much is it per month? $50 a month for Webflow, but then you might be spending a whole lot more in additional functionality that you've added or customizations that you have to pay for. So for them, the marketplace is like their key thing that they're trying to position. Now that's not the case right now with Drupal, because nobody's really selling, I mean, for the most part, we're not like selling new modules and recipes, but in the same way, we really want people to use the recipes and the modules available and have easy access to them. So looking at these patterns and how marketplace is just right there, I thought was pretty interesting. And just using that label of marketplace, something I think people look for. In some case, the dashboard is set up as kind of a settings page. So if you actually go into the Webflow dashboard for an individual site, it's basically a list of settings, which doesn't seem to me that exciting. Like if I'm looking at a dashboard, I kind of want to see an overview of my site, not just how to change the name. And then we saw some other interesting things. So I thought the WordPress.com one does well. This is like kind of similar to what we saw previously for Contentful, where it's really showing you the steps and giving you this preview of like what you're going to have to do to make your site successful. So driving traffic, sharing your site, these are really marketing-oriented activities. For Contentful, surprise, surprise, it's all really content-focused. So what they call a dashboard is what in Drupal we would call the content overview page. And so they prioritize really giving people a good sense of what content they have and having filters and things like that around their content. One observation I've heard from content editors over the years is that they often find it hard to find their own content. So like we might be building like really interesting search tools on the front end designed for end users, but actually having a better way for the content editors to find what they've or their colleagues have created is something that we could usefully fit into a dashboard interface. Revisions on WordPress are just as technical looking as revisions on Drupal. I thought that was interesting. There's also a whole lot that we could get into about page building. So, for example, Webflow, which is a product that has been brought up again and again in conversations about what Drupal CMS should be. Webflow is a tool that's more designed for developers. So even though we can find some useful patterns around like how do we build a flexible editorial experience, just looking at the different screens you have to go to build a page, a lot of the things that we see like having to look at containers and having the layout and design information, like me as a front-end developer, I love seeing this, but as somebody who's not familiar with, how CSS for a website works, would find probably confusing or just too much information. So Webflow was an interesting example from that perspective. WordPress, so everybody's heard of Gutenberg. How many people have actually used it? Yeah, I think it's something we kind of assume is a great experience because people talk about it all the time. But when it launched, it was really controversial. It is this kind of powerful WYSIWYG that allows you to create content. And what I thought, like just looking at the benchmarking and starting to add a lot of my own opinions into this presentation, I realized that like it really felt the nice thing about it was that you didn't have to start from a blank slate. So whereas with Drupal, if you go in and build a page from scratch with Layout Builder, typically you would be having to build everything yourself. You set up the layout, you start putting in content, whereas the typical experience with Gutenberg feels a little bit more like you're adding a thing that already has some structure and you don't have to start really with a blank page because it already looks like, if I'm picking a component, like it's already looking like I can imagine it being a website. And then there were a lot of templating options as well. One thing that I've always noticed about some of these page building experiences is that the terminology is hard to get right. We have sections, we have components. On the Webflow one, we saw the word container. It's really hard to figure out what all these words should be, especially in Drupal where we already have tons of words for things like blocks and paragraphs and whatnot. So having this nice plus just kind of like avoids the issue and says, you want to add a thing, right? So just add. And I've always liked that. So some observations about this. Drupal has a lot of flexibility and I didn't show the examples of that because basically all the benchmarking of things like user roles and taxonomy, other platforms don't really have a better model to offer. I didn't really find any nuggets there. So we should just keep doing what we're doing well. But things like dashboards and page building, there's a ton more work that could be done and UX things to solve. I'm going to talk for 1 second about reusable content, because this was something that came up in the user interviews, and that's why it's showing up in the list of tasks. So as one of the CMS tasks that content editors and marketers really talked about repeatedly, it was, how do I reuse content? And not just in the sense of like, I create a blog post, so I expect it to show up on a list of blog posts on the homepage, but more like, I create a component within my page, how do I reuse that? How do I avoid rewriting everything? How do I have a library of content? And so with Webflow, again, being more of a technical tool, creating custom blocks in Webflow, like the process really started to feel like a technical thing. Like you have to pick all these design options. It feels like something you have to be more of an expert to do. In WordPress, the reusable content components show up as these patterns that you can go and add. And one thing that kind of became apparent just in the documentation that the person did when they benchmarked is that they went through all these steps, but maybe not in the anticipated order, because like when you're adding reusable content, do you plan in advance for it to be reusable and you create the content and then you put it into your page? Or is it like as you're creating your page, you flag something that you want to be reusable for later? Or is it that the second time you create a page and you wanted to reuse an element from the first page, that's when you decide that it should be reusable? So it really drove home the point to me that with reusable content, you have a lot of governance issues that pop up. You're just going to end up with content that lives in many places, and so there's not just one edit link to edit the content anymore. And so it makes managing and having good governance more of a challenge. Theme selection isn't something that Drupal CMS has really tried to delve into yet. Basically, when you install Drupal CMS, you get the Olivera theme by default, and you can add other themes like you normally would. But you can imagine that content editors and marketers might be really excited about having more of a good ecosystem of themes they can pick from. So we were looking for examples of that, and definitely the thing people noticed on WordPress.com is the ability to preview a theme. So that seemed like one of the top things we would want to consider. I'm going to skip over this. And then just show you maybe one more example of this idea of ecosystem. So I think before we were looking at WordPress.org and how you go about adding plugins there. And here we're looking more at the marketplace of plugins that you would see if you're on WordPress.com. And so it does look different, and it does look more like this kind of store, like we might see like as an app store. And so the thing that was really highlighted here is that you have to actually update to this business plan to install plugins. So just a way for Drupal to differentiate itself, that you don't have to kind of sign on to something like that to start experimenting and building your site. I mentioned as part of the user interviews that one of the things I really noticed from the interviews is that people found that onboarding their team, access to documentation was an important deciding factor in picking their CMS. And so one of the tasks is actually looking for documentation. And in the Webflow benchmarking showed this nice example that video tutorials are actually embedded right into the interface. Of course, video tutorials are notoriously hard to maintain. Just creating videos in the first place is more work than written documentation, but it means you also have to keep them up to date. But that being said, it just really changes the feel and kind of normalizes going and getting help about a topic. So something to consider is how we make documentation available in the back end. So again, some observations just to sum up, and this is the end of the benchmarking session. I know I've shown you tons of screenshots, but basically reusable content is something that people are going to keep asking for, but it does make your site so much more complex from a content management perspective. So I think this is one where we probably need a lot of attention from UX and content strategy on how this should be implemented in Drupal. Ecosystem is this big opportunity, but Drupal is already something people use because it's community supported. So how do we balance these things of setting up an ecosystem, setting up a marketplace where it feels really easy to go and pick what features you want to add, but maybe without it feeling so much like a store. And then this opportunity of embedded docs, because there's work being done to basically write new documentation from Drupal CMS kind of from the ground up. So this big investment in documentation that you'll see if you try and use it. But is there a way we should be actually adding that into the admin UI? I think that's an interesting UX idea. So what's next? We have all this set of input that we've gotten from the interviews, from the benchmarking. Now, how are we actually going to make Drupal CMS easier to use? So this is now a screenshot, the first one from Drupal CMS itself. It is a product now that we can try out and start using, but how do we make the UX of it better? So I think some challenges. It's hard with the way that Drupal is developed, being open source, to just top down say, here's what the UX should be, here's what the direction should be. So certain elements that I've highlighted in this talk, like having a dashboard, are things that different developer groups are contributing to. So Drupal CMS is being developed by all kinds of different agencies, like Evolving Web's doing the analytics track. There's a track for AI, there's a track for accessibility, there's a track for media management. I should know this off the top of my head, but over 20 tracks at this point, pretty sure. So, so the question is, if there's something like a dashboard that's influenced by different developers doing different things, how do we make sure that the UX is cohesive and that it is the way we want it to be? So that's a challenge. Community content, like descriptions of modules, descriptions of plugins, descriptions of themes, this has a big impact on the UX. So how do we, the project browser project has really worked hard on this problem, but I think it's still a problem, and those descriptions are not written for our target audience. And then in general, how do we identify and change Drupalisms being like jargon that we use all the time, and how do we make it friendly for newcomers without totally breaking how people think of Drupal if they've been using it for a long time. So I think these are things we should be thinking of. And then I think big opportunities, for me, marketing integrations. I think just adding in an extra thing like, here, you can go pick your modules and your themes, but here's like a specific page for marketing integrations, and here's 10 of them that we recommend using. I think that would be a huge win for marketers, because they're just going to see right away that they can start plugging their stuff into Drupal. Make that super obvious. And then the other big opportunity is the experience builder, which is being developed kind of with the plan of it being soon in Drupal CMS. And it is much faster to edit things. It's giving you this more layered experience where you see your content, but you can also edit the layout and the style of things. It's React-based, so it's super fast, and it's designed with the idea of giving it to designers in the future to also be able to control the look and feel of elements more easally. So this is a huge opportunity, but obviously it's going to have a big impact on what Drupal CMS feels like. And when I'm looking at benchmarking all these other tools, sometimes the UX feels like it just comes down to what this page builder experience feels like. That's where the editors are going to spend so much of their time. So if you want to get involved, I invite you to look at that the benchmarking form you can fill in. That form goes right to an Airtable, which you can get a link to also on that page. So I mentioned a bunch of CMSs in the course of this talk, but if anyone wants to do some benchmarking of some more paid, like Adobe Experience Manager, CMSs like this, we would love to get that data as well. So feel free to talk to me if you want to benchmark something else, you have an idea. You should also go ahead and try out Drupal CMS. So you've got the link there. And I did a webinar a couple weeks ago more about just Drupal CMS, some demos, how you can start using it. So if this is kind of your first introduction to Drupal CMS and I'm going right into the user research, that would be a good background thing to watch to get more of an overview. And as Alex mentioned in the opening, we do have this Evolve Drupal event coming up in Boston, so I just wanted to remind everybody and put a little plug for that. And I hope we have a couple minutes left for questions.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, great. When I say 2 minutes for questions, nobody wants to ask questions. Yes?
What's going on in Boston?
Oh, in Boston. Yeah, so this is it's like a Drupal camp. It's called Evolve Drupal, and it's a one-day event where we do stuff like this, but also a lot more case studies and a lot of things that are like not Drupal specific. Like we have UX, UX working sessions and more topics like brand and other CMSs too that we invite.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, going on this bit.ly/Drupal CMS benchmarking, is that where we can go to contribute?
Yeah, so that's the specific page, and I could pull it up here, but like it's an Airtable, which is like a big spreadsheet. It's where you go. I'm just gonna go back to the slide where I put the little screenshot so I can show you. That's where you would go if you wanted to fill in this form, so you can actually help us with some benchmarking. You don't have to go and do all 23 tasks for a CMS. You can pick one CMS and one task. Like you say, like, oh yeah, I've always wanted to try Squarespace. So I'll go and install that, and then I'm going to pick the task of, creating reusable page templates. So what does Squarespace give me for that? And then it walks you through the steps of kind of documenting what you see. You can add some screenshots, and that will be super helpful for us. So it's a way to contribute without spending a ton of time if you just want to help out with one thing.
Get some experience.
Exactly. And then there was also, I don't think I even said the words, but there's also
It's a good way to fill out your resume too.
Yeah, I've contributed to Drupal CMS, it's great. There's also this Slack channel, so if you're already on the Drupal Slack, Drupal CMS UX marketing, so you can pop in there if you want to do other things, anything UX related, like you want to help us do usability testing, or if you have people that you know who could participate in usability testing who aren't Drupal experts, that would be great. Or if you want to contribute more long-term to, creating some wireframes, if you actually have a bunch of time to commit, then you can go there and let us know. And my handle is Pixelite on Drupal Slack, so you can always just tag me or reach out.
I went to Evolve Drupal in New York, and it was great. So if people are thinking of going to Boston,
Yeah, we'll probably do another one in New York too, but the Boston one is for sure, and it's in June.
This is not a short question, but do you feel like right now, whatever site, excuse me, in the Drupal core right now, supposed to, like Drupal CMS, where it's going to replace Drupal core in future, or like
Not exactly, because Drupal CMS, like I tried to show in the first slides, it's helping you get to your finished site goal, but you are still using Drupal core. So if you already have your site built on Drupal, you don't need to go and use Drupal CMS. You're already using a lot of the elements of it. I did a presentation with my colleague, there's also a webinar about it that we did that's like, how can you use Drupal CMS if you're already on Drupal? And then you're looking more at like, oh, well, what if I'm missing the SEO tools aspect of it or the accessibility features of it? Like, how can I go back and take advantage of some of that work that's been done to improve the experience? So you can definitely use elements like with the recipes, but you shouldn't be thinking of like, I need to migrate to Drupal CMS or I need to rebuild my site. Like, not at all. You're already on Drupal, you're good. You can learn about Drupal CMS, it's useful, but it's not like something you have to move to or worry about in that way.
So just building up on her question, why would an organization pick one over the other?
Oh, I think at this point, Drupal CMS is useful for any project. So even as like a team where we know Drupal inside out, we can build a site without Drupal CMS, but Drupal CMS is going to save us time and help us pick more standardized modules. So I'd say like, for the most part, there's no reason not to just start using it, unless, I guess, asterisk, if you're an organization that's already built your own kind of standard install, like Princeton uses Drupal for many websites. If you have the standard install you're using, you wouldn't turn around and just swap that out for Drupal CMS because you're going to lose a lot of the work you've done picking the modules and the custom theme and whatever else that you've designed for it. So in that case, no, but in most cases, I would start with Drupal CMS over Drupal core.
We're 4 minutes over.
Okay, yes, thanks so much for everyone. Really appreciate it.